Welcome everybody to GNG Link. I always say LinkedIn, but it's GNG live show because we are live on multiple platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So thank you for tuning in. Sorry about last week. We had technical difficulties. Well, I did. Internet wasn't working. So we couldn't come on live. And even today, I almost didn't make it thanks to the neighborhood electricity being out. But made it, so we're here. Gail and I have a great guest, and I will give Gil the honor to introduce our guest today. Gil?
So I'd like to introduce everyone to my friend Alena, who is a leadership coach and all-around insightful human being. She's had a really fascinating career path, which could probably be a whole topic and conversation on its own. But today, Alena wants to talk about imposter syndrome. One of the things, I don't know if Gurpreet and I have ever discussed this, but when we have guests, we always ask them to bring the topic, because we want them to have, opinions and a lot to say about it. And Alena has a lot to say about it. Imposter syndrome, and specifically what we're going to talk about today is imposter syndrome around new managers. Because there's a lot that goes into becoming a new manager, and a lot of people face this. So I'm going to turn it over to Alena and talk about what you were thinking about when you brought up this topic.
Well, first of all, guys, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be finally on GNG Live. That's a very special experience for me. So as Gil mentioned, I'm a leadership coach and facilitator with the Achievement Center, and I work a lot with managers and turning them into high-performing leaders. And through a lot of my conversations with managers, this topic really comes up a lot. And I'm sure all of you at some point heard about imposter syndrome. What really is the experience, that internal belief that you're not as competent as other people perceive you to be. So you can imagine that imposter syndrome leads to a lot of feeling of loneliness and the self-doubt and stress and burnout at the end of it, because the energy drain that keeps you kind of the thoughts twirling in your head. And when it comes to managers, I find that the imposter syndrome is a little bit different. So when we talk about the regular imposter syndrome, the most common kind, we talk a lot about the internal dialogue, the internal self-doubt that's based usually just on your own perception. However, when it comes to new managers, that imposter syndrome can actually be in part true, because there is this common approach to promotion to manager position as a reward for great performance of individual contributors, or as a result of tenure with the company. So I'm sure, Gil, you know all about that. I'm sure we had the conversations about that. So that's why today I really wanted to talk about this, because the approach to dealing with that sort of imposter syndrome is a little bit different from the regular one.
So how would you respond? Say you and I are talking, I've been asked to talk to you as a coach. I'm a new manager. I'm one of those high-flying individual contributors. I've done a great job. I'm the best one on the team, made the most widgets week over week, and they've made me into the manager. And, I might have some natural competencies with leadership, but in general, I have no gained skills. I have no real knowledge of what I'm doing and how to lead a team. And I come to you and say, hey, Alena, I'm dealing with imposter syndrome. I'm no better than any of these people. I am no more capable in leading this team. I have no idea what I'm doing. How do I face this? What's my first step?
So there's actually a couple of different things. And again, because I mentioned that this sort of imposter syndrome is a little bit different from your regular imposter syndrome, there is many facets to that, internal and now external as well, right? So some of it may be valid because what got you to that individual performance and producing as many widgets as you possibly could. So now you're on this, the top employee of the month, but the skills that got you there may not necessarily be the skills that will make you a great people leader. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. So one of the first steps is to really understand your new role. What is that your new mission? Because before the spotlight was on you, it's about you doing the things, having full control over your performance. Well, now your role is very different. Now your role is about getting results through other people. So that your role is becoming about creating the environment for your team to get the best performance. So to be productive, to be motivated, to be engaged in the work that they're doing. So you can imagine that just that understanding that shift is a major thing. Now, the 60+%, I would say 60+% of your time should be actually on your team, focused on meeting the needs of your team rather than your own individual performance. So you can imagine, so just that alone will create a big shift. And then understanding what that role entails. What are some of the skills that I need to perform in that role? And how can I create a map together with people who I report to? How do I create a map to get me the skills that I need to get? So that would be the first step.
So I just want to interject for a second, which we should have done this first. Let's define, I don't know if everybody has a clear definition what imposter syndrome is. So would you want to actually walk us through what it means? And then the second layer is what you said, it's different in the workplace or with new managers compared to traditional. So let's take a moment, if you can walk us through what is imposter syndrome, first of all, and how it's different in a work setting.
So absolutely. So the imposter syndrome, as I mentioned before, it's that experience, that internal feeling that you're not as competent as other people believe you to be. So that's that constant feeling of the fear of being found out. That one day you walk in and people will realize you're not as competent. So you're always you're not always, but a lot of the times you're feeling like you're wearing a mask. So for example, I had a conversation with somebody, and that kind of transitioning into the workplace. So I had a conversation with somebody I truly admired, somebody who was a great leader, somebody who said, you know what? I always thought that great leader needs to be an extrovert. So for years, I pretended to be an extrovert at work. For 10 years, she pretended to be an extrovert at work, whereas at home, she's like, I'm an extreme introvert. So this is something, and when you realize that, so it's about pretending sometimes to be somebody else. And there is a manifestation of the imposter syndrome in so many different ways. It can be a perfectionist. So now I'm going to try to get everything done A++, 100% of the time. So managers like that. So that's one of the manifestation of imposter syndrome. So we're gonna make it perfect all the time. Sometimes it becomes this belief of, if I were truly competent, I would know all the answers. Again, I'm sure we all know managers like that, right? Sometimes it's about the superhero. Well, if I were truly competent, I would be able to do it all. Again, I'm sure we all know examples of that. It can be about, if I were competent, it should come faster or easy. And finally, sometimes it's about, if I were really competent, I would be able to do it on my own. So you can imagine in workplace, in managers, that manifests quite often. And sometimes it's a blend of those different things.
So I had this. As you're talking, it took me way back to my first manager role. So I got a manager role within 3 years of my HR career in a new company. And exactly what you said, I only have 3 years in HR. So right away, insecurities kicked in. I didn't think I can do the job indirectly because I felt like I didn't know anything as a manager, like stepping into a manager role. Top of that, a new company, never worked in before. I had so many insecurities that I was going to fail at this job, and people are going to be like, how did she get this job? And on top of that, being young, and I look young, so that didn't help either. And I had so many insecurities. I can't even put it into words what I was feeling when I went into this role. Even now, I can't put it in feelings, but when you're describing it, I was like, yeah, I went through it. And then I went through when I became an entrepreneur. I don't know anything. I don't think I can be a consultant. How can I fix people's problems? Like that whole mental state. You know you're good, but then it's like, I don't know.
100%. And how did that impact your ability to lead other people? So having all those insecurities, having that self-doubt, draining your energy, and second guessing yourself.
You know what? I was gonna ask you a question actually on that. Was I feel like I could have done a lot much. Not that I didn't do really good in my role, but I felt like if I had the support from my boss. And weird thing is, when I got hired, the person, my boss originally who hired me, the VP of HR, she resigned when I joined.
Oh my goodness.
To go work for another company. So I got a new boss.
What did you do to her, Gurpreet?
I never even met her. That's the other thing. I never even met her. My interviews were over the phone. When I got the job, I've never met her. She was in a different location. So we had a weekly HR call. So my first time attending this call, when she announced it, right away my insecurities even went up, because I'm like, hired me. Now the new person's going to be like, why did she hire somebody with zero management experience? So that even like took it to a whole level. So I don't know what was going on in the background. I just know that even the new boss never took the opportunity to work with me or talk to me. I wasn't supported properly to be successful in my role, knowing that I've never had manager experience before. I have experience in HR, but not to the management level. So that, I think, in back of my mind, I'm like, I'm getting fired. I'm getting fired. I did get fired. Even though I performed excellent, that facility that I was, a call center that I was managing, never seen numbers the way I was able to. I brought down attendance, everything. My success in 6 months beats anybody's success in that facility, but I still got fired. I already knew I was getting fired because apparently there was a history in that location. That HR manager, for some reason, only lasted 6 months. But me personally, I didn't got the proper support. So my question to you on this is, when we as managers or bosses or whatever, when we promote somebody into a manager role, how can we avoid all this? Like imposters, they're gonna go through it. Like majority of us will go through it when we're stepping into a new role. So how can a company or manager or boss support the new team member that has never been a manager before?
So you know what, and this is an excellent question, and this is really at the core of it. So you mentioned a couple of things. There's an external responsibility as a company, as a manager who's promoting, there is that extra responsibility. So I think, first of all, before even promoting somebody to the manager role, I think that's where it starts, even before that promotion, because the classic way of promoting people to manager roles is that, like I mentioned at the beginning, is that if somebody has been with the company 5, 10, X number of years, the natural step is becoming a people manager. Or if somebody is technical expert or showed themselves as a star individual performance, so we promote them. You know what, and 95% of companies do that. This is a kind of a natural way to do this. But it's almost like, and I'm going to use this sports analogy, though I'm not a sports person at all, but it's like if you're a star hockey player, so let's promote you to a tennis player because you're good at sports, and we're not going to explain you the rules. So kindly learn as you in the middle of the match, right? So in kind of just those assumptions that the one thing that made you a star in something is not necessarily going to make you a star in something else. So this is even before the promotion. Go ahead.
And I just want to add something to that. And now you're also down one great hockey player. That's also one
Yes.
thing
Oh my
that
God.
a lot of
100%.
organizations don't remember, is that not only are you taking a person who doesn't have necessarily the skills and knowledge that, again, like you said, going from hockey to tennis, I mean, it's a completely different world. Being an
Exactly.
individual contributor and a manager, you have completely different requirements, different expectations. And now you're also taking that star player and they're no longer making all those wonderful widgets because they're learning a whole new skill set. Sorry to interrupt there, but
No,
I just wanted to add
no,
that.
that's a really great point. So now we have this star hockey player playing tennis. Well, they need tennis related training because they need to understand the rules of the game. How do you even win in tennis, right? And do you even like tennis? Just because you like hockey, like Gil, to your point, do you even like tennis? So it's when we take a star performance, and you have no idea how many times I speak to managers and I ask them, what is the thing that you like the most about your work? And then I ask them about what do you like the least? You have no idea how many times dealing with people comes up. So just imagine we have people, like I said, we're down one star hockey player, and now we have that frustrated hockey player managing other tennis players. So it's kind of like we're creating that we're setting the company up for failure. So it's really, really important to treat it not as a natural progression, but it's two completely different roles. So now you have the technical expertise, but people managers require completely different skill sets. So how do we make sure that we have the right people in the right roles? Super, super important to prevent a lot of that. But then once we actually promote people, then like you mentioned, super important, we need to make sure we create support systems. We explain to them what their role is, what the expectations are, because success and failure, relative concepts. We need to understand, we need to understand what the standards are, what's expected of us, so we can actually hit that performance.
The
and then
process is so important.
Yeah, it's like if we don't know the GPS location of where we need to go, the chances of us getting there are significantly lower. We need to understand what is it we actually striving to get. And the onboarding for people managers, investing in their training, coaching, and providing continuous feedback. They need to understand they're on the right path or not, so they can course correct as they go, instead of waiting 6 months and then realizing they're failing and quitting.
Yeah, you know what? That 6 months that I was in that role, I only met my boss twice.
Here you go.
One was when she was doing her rounds because she's new, so she did her rounds to meet people. Second was when she terminated me.
Oh my God.
And I knew, and the way it was done, it was really bad, but I already knew when I saw it. I was like, oh, I'm getting terminated. I think it's so important. I respect one of my other bosses. I think it's like especially right now. So I'm going to use right now pandemic as the perfect example of why this is so important to do, because we're remote based now. A lot of us are working from home, even new employees, that when you are onboarding a new employee, I think the manager needs to be the first person that does that introduction, does that one-on-one time with them, and set those expectations of, here's what your role is, here's my expectations, here's how I'm going to measure you, building that 90, 60, 90, like 30, 90, 30, 60, yes. 90, I went 30 to 90, 30 to 90,
yes.
90 days, process. And because I wasn't given that, I make sure it's nice to have that experiences for us to be better, for me anyways, to be really good at what I do, is because I have so many bad experiences myself. To be able to be a good HR person is that, no, you need to, it's not fair to an employee, even if it's an internal promotion, you still need to have those onboarding. It doesn't matter internal or external. The only way, I think for a manager level especially, the only way an individual can be so successful in their job is if you give them the proper tools, if you give them the proper expectations, what's expected from them, do those check-in meetings with them on regular basis. It's so important. 6 months of me being in really new role, no clue. I had more insecurities than I ever did. I was scared that I'm failing. Even though the other managers like, no, you're like the best HR manager we've ever had, I still felt like I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna fail because I've never been a manager, and then I'm in a new company and I've never met my boss. Never.
Yeah.
She didn't.
That's so important. Like, shows how important your manager is, right? That you're in a place being successful day after day, but your organization didn't recognize it.
No.
And you still felt uncomfortable. You still had an overall bad experience despite being successful because you had no idea what success meant from the organization's perspectives. But I also want to go back in a second in terms of, onboarding the manager, is that there's even steps before that of understanding, like Alena said, do they want to be a manager? Do they have the propensity to be a manager? Because you can have the shape to be an amazing hockey player, but that's not really the appropriate shape to get around quickly to play tennis. And that's the same kind of thing with people, is that, do they even want to be a manager? Because if so many managers are saying their least favorite part of it is dealing with people, that's a problem to begin with.
Yep.
They probably shouldn't have been a manager to begin with, but they were told, hey, this is how you're going to get a promotion. This is how you're going to get a title bump. This is how you're going to get a pay bump, because we're going to make you a manager, because we have no ladder to go up on the individual contributor scale. So now we're not going to check if you even have the right skills, knowledge, and behaviors to be a manager. Because I've met people who are incredible leaders, who are frontline staff, who, if they were put into a managerial position, their teams would work wonders for them because they already have the right behaviors in terms of dealing with people. Mm-hmm. But those aren't necessarily the same behaviors that are going to make you the most widgets, that are going to put you at the front of the line to earn that managerial position. So I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the onboarding. That's I believe one of the biggest contributing factors to bad employee experiences is that 100%. Managers are the biggest contributor to employee experience, and we don't teach them how to do well. We just throw them in their role, and the selection is wrong to begin with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You said something interesting about promoting people into managers, and well, are they, like you said, are they even the right fit for being a manager? I think to be a manager, there's many aspects. Biggest aspect is people. Are you a people person? I remember my first HR job, production manager, was not a people person at all. Hiring for his team was a mission for me, because I couldn't directly tell candidates that he's not, being very polite when I say this, that he's not a people person, right? So needed somebody that can put up with his mood swings, and if something goes wrong, you have to blame his attitude. But I remember when I think he was looking for another job or something like that, because the plant closed down, so obviously everybody was laid off. He was looking for, obviously, because he was laid off too, he needed to get another job. And he reached out to my HR manager, who was my boss, asking for reference. And my boss said to him very nicely and politely, I decline. I cannot be your reference because I don't think you should be a manager, because you don't like people. You need to find another role that has no interaction with people, because managers interact with people. And unfortunately, you suck. You're not a people person. Everybody hated him. People had nicknames for him. I don't even know if he knew that, but no one liked him because he actually didn't even like people either. He didn't want to, he didn't have that. And so many times we promote people, we hire people in managers' roles without actually even properly doing due diligence to know if they actually are a people person.
And that's used also often as a reward. So it kind of creates this trap. And I think Gil mentioned that. So it creates this trap where somebody has such a difficult time to say, I don't want this promotion. I don't want to be a people manager because that seems to be the only way up. And kind of it's the expectations. Well, you've worked here for 10 years, you're still not a manager. What's wrong with you? It's kind of like, well, that's kind of the validation you need to get there. So we also need to start looking, companies need to start looking at creating those expert, subject matter experts in specific fields without becoming a manager and letting them what they do best. So the person you mentioned, maybe they were not a people person, maybe they were not a great manager, but can you imagine maybe they were in the wrong place, and if they were by themselves, they could be fantastic at what they do, and they would have completely different relationships with people. But that's the key. And when we have those frustrated managers, Gil alluded to that, it's kind of like, this is the key to great employee experience, because 70% or more of our interactions are with our managers. So when our managers, it's one of the biggest roadblocks and reasons for poor employee experience. And we need to create great manager experience for our managers to unlock a great employee experience. It's absolutely critical.
You hit it right there. I think that's one of the things that's often forgotten, is that managers are employees. They have an experience that also needs to be understood and crafted, because we don't do it leads to bad experiences for everybody. And when a manager has a bad experience, it scales out to their team. It's not just them having poor performance. The one question I have, Alena, is then what are your thoughts, because we're talking about training and onboarding, is just the idea of teaching new managers, saying, hey, imposter syndrome exists. Here's why it exists. The only way past it is through. Just keep on going, because yes, you're going to feel that way. We're going to give you the support you need to get comfortable, but what you're feeling right now is totally normal. You're not alone.
Yeah.
I think that's just so important and so helpful for a manager to just hear those words.
And exactly. And it's really important to also know that it's okay to have that gap between where you are and where you need to go, and having a clear roadmap how to bridge that gap and how to actually feel those missing pieces in terms of the actual training. Sometimes it's about actually practicing some of the behaviors, because it's not enough just to theoretically read about what the great leader is, but to go ahead and apply it, but continuously get feedback from your peers, from your direct reports, from the manager. So having that open conversation to say, okay, how am I doing? Facts-based. This is the expectations. This is where you are. This is how we need to get to close this gap. Because being managers, and especially middle-level managers, which are the kind of your first managers, it's a really challenging position. You have to manage down, up. You have new responsibilities, still new to this, understanding your role. So they need to get as much support as possible, because if they're indecisive, if they're not risk takers, if they procrastinate, if they're kind of keep, being stuck in their self-doubt, that means their team suffers, the talent drain, the productivity, disengagement, poor employee experience. Super, super important.
It's a shame we're coming up on time now, because honestly, we could talk another half hour on specifically about what you're talking about in terms of ensuring that the new manager has feedback, because it takes a lot to create the environment, to create that safety that the team can share openly, that the manager can share openly, that they understand that imperfections are not a sign of failure. They're not a sign that you're an imposter. It's a sign that you're learning, and it's a sign of the step along the way. But honestly, that is a whole nother day. So I just want to say thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm having flashbacks to all the different times I've had imposter syndrome. I'm not immune to it, even at this point in my career, certainly not. But I just want to thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll have to have you on again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alena, for hopping on with us today to be our guest. And as always, we always run out of time.
Yes, exactly.
So much. Nice to finally meet you and speak with you, and also for you to share these wonderful topic with everybody. And pretty sure, actually, confession, I didn't even know I had it until you started talking, and I was like, oh my God, I went through it too. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people who tuned in today, listened to it, probably have flashback just like I did and Gil did. And some people may be new managers right now and probably realizing this is what's happening to me. So it's perfectly normal, guys, to go through this process at any given point in your career. It's not just about new managers. It can happen any given point. So thank you, Alena, for sharing such great advice and tips on that. On that note, we will end our segment. If you like this segment, please show us some love. We will be back next week with another topic. Not sure if you have a guest yet, but another topic. And if you want, speaking of guests, if you want to be a guest on our show, feel free to reach out to myself or Gil. On that note, actually, Alena, how can people reach out to you?
Well, actually, but probably one of the best ways is through LinkedIn or my email at alenas@tacresults.com. So I'm always, and thank you so much, guys, for having me. And like Gil said, no one is immune to this. And just understanding what's happening and knowing how you can actually deal with that just gives you back the sense of control. So you feel a little bit more empowered. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. So if you want to be a guest on our show, please reach out to Gil and myself. And we do allow our guests to pick the topic. So we're not upset about what topic it needs to be. As long as you want to be a guest and you have a great topic, more than welcome to be a guest on GNG. So on that note, we will end our segment and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.